I thought I had buried him. 3 years. 3 long, quiet years without his voice in my head, without his scent ghosting across my skin, without waking in the middle of the night reaching for a body I wasn't supposed to crave. I married Ethan to escape that ghost, to bury the hunger and start over. I told myself that safety was better than desire, that predictability would be enough, but peace has a strange sound to it, like silence that hums too loud, like stillness that presses against your chest. And then tonight, there was a knock. I was folding Ethan's shirts, standing barefoot in the soft light of our lake house, the windows open to the cicadas and the smell of pine. 3 knocks. Slow. Measured. Like someone who already knew I would open the door. And I did that. I don't know what I expected. A neighbor? A delivery? God. Even a mistake. But not him. Not the one I had spent every waking hour trying not to think about. Richard. He stood there like he hadn't vanished. Like he hadn't destroyed me. The same storm gray eyes. That same mouth, sharp, unforgiving, and unbearably familiar. Time hadn't softened him. It had carved him deeper. The streaks of silver in his hair only made him more dangerous. I felt my breath catch, not from fear, not from shock, but from that dark, stupid ache that I thought I'd strangled years ago. He looked at me like he was already inside. "You look tired of pretending," he said, voice low and rough, the way it always was when he was about to take something he knew didn't belong to him. And I never liked sharing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My fingers were trembling around the edge of the door, my wedding ring suddenly heavy, like a lie pressed into gold. He leaned in, eyes steady. "You married my son to escape me," he said, as if that truth didn't scorch the air between us. "But you and I both know you were never done with me." And the worst part, the part that made my knees want to give out, was that he was right. I wasn't, not even close. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. His presence alone was already pulling the air out of the room, replacing it with that electric charge. I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. I closed the door in his face. Not out of strength, but desperation. I pressed my back against the wood, heart pounding. I could still feel him out there, waiting, not moving, just like before. That unbearable patience of his, always waiting for me to break first. And I always did. The worst part wasn't that he came back. It was that a part of me, a quiet, shameful part, had imagined he would. Over the years, in the quiet moments when Ethan's soft hands touched my body like I might shatter, too gentle, too careful, I would remember Richard. Not with guilt, but with something more dangerous. Hunger. We were a terrible idea from the start. I met him when I was too young to understand what obsession looked like when it wore a suit and smiled like sin. He was older, married, powerful. I was just the assistant to his executive assistant. He didn't even glance at me the first few months, but when he finally did, it wasn't like being seen. It was like being claimed. It started with glances. Then a brush of the hand that lingered 1 second too long. A door held open just for me, his eyes never leaving my face. I knew I should have pulled away. I knew the rules. But there was something in him, something that knew every part of me I kept hidden. The parts that wanted to be ruined, wanted to be undone. The first time he kissed me, I didn't even kiss him back. I just stood there, breathless, throat tight, his mouth moving against mine like he was breathing life into a corpse. When he pulled back, I opened my eyes and saw something terrifying, myself. Wanting him, willing to burn my life down for one more taste. We hid it. Of course we did. Hotel rooms on business trips, locked offices after hours. My name on his lips in the dark, whispered like a prayer and a curse. I wasn't his mistress. That word is too soft, too polite. I was his outlet, his poison, his equal. But Richard wasn't a man who loved. He devoured, and God help me, I let him. It was never going to last. I knew it. He knew it. The world doesn't let men like him keep women like me. Not when there are deals to close, reputations to protect, and family names to preserve. He ended it. Cold. Final. No warning. No goodbye. One day I was his. The next I was a stranger. He married a woman with clean nails and a polite smile. Had a son, Ethan. I left the city a month later and never looked back. But even after all these years, I can still remember what it felt like when his hands were on me. How he made me feel terrible and alive, drenched in guilt, but gasping for more. The way he'd look at me like I was the only thing that had ever made sense in his ruined world. Ethan never looked at me like that. He looked at me with hope, with belief, and I was tired of being believed in, because underneath the ring and the lake house and the soft domestic routine, the truth still pulsed beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. Richard had ruined me for anyone else, and now he was back. I married Ethan on a Tuesday, and oh, grand church, no string quartet. Just a courthouse, a borrowed dress, and a man who loved me far more than I could ever love him. He held my hand like it was something sacred, like he'd won some silent war to have me. And maybe, in a way, he wasn't Richard. He wasn't dangerous or sharp or laced with shadows. He was safe. Ethan had a kindness in him that made me feel small. Not weak, but undeserving. He looked at me like I was this beautiful, broken thing he could piece back together if he was just gentle enough. That first night in his arms, he didn't take me like a man claiming a prize. He touched me like I might vanish, and I hated how that made me cry. There were moments, long stretches of days, even when I thought maybe I could build something real with Ethan.
He was good to me.
Thoughtful. Attentive. When I woke from dreams soaked in heat and guilt, he'd pull me close without asking questions. He never pried into my past, never asked why I flinched when his hands wandered too close to my throat. He just accepted me, scars and all. But love, no, I never gave him love. What I gave him was proximity. I gave him my mornings, my rituals, my quiet sighs and tired smiles. I gave him the version of me that could survive in daylight. But I kept the rest, the feral, aching, ruined parts, locked away in the dark corners of my memory where Richard still breathed. Some people marry for passion, others for money, power, status. I married for silence. I thought that if I wrapped myself in Ethan's steadiness long enough, the screaming inside me would finally stop, but I didn't. Our wedding night, after the dinner and the soft music and the clinking glasses, Ethan kissed me with a reverence that made me want to scream. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because he wasn't doing anything Richard would have done. Richard would have pressed me against the wall before the door even closed. Richard would have torn the dress off like it offended him. Richard would have made me forget my own name. But Ethan just looked at me, whispered how lucky he was, and kissed me slow, so heartbreakingly tender that I almost begged him to stop. Because I didn't want to be worshipped, I wanted to be destroyed. It's a terrible thing, to lie in bed next to someone who would give you the world and still feel utterly alone. That I tried. For months, I tried. I cooked his favorite meals. I let him read to me on the porch. I smiled when he brought me wildflowers. I moaned when he touched me, even when my body wasn't really there, because I wanted to be good, that I wanted to be enough for the kind of man I was supposed to want. But deep down, I knew Ethan was just the house I built to keep the storm out. He was the walls, the roof, the lock on the door. He was everything I needed to feel safe, and I resented him for it, because I didn't want to be safe anymore. Not really that I wanted the storm to come back, and now he had. I hadn't seen him again for 3 days after the knock point, 3 days of pretending not to look for his shadow around corners. 3 days of quiet meals with Ethan, fake laughter, hands that didn't tremble when I poured wine. I thought maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe that moment on the porch had been some cruel echo from our past, something that would fade if I just ignored it long enough. Then I saw him again. Not in secret, not in shadows. He was at our lake house, standing by the dock, shirt sleeves rolled, sunglasses perched atop his head like this was just another summer visit to see his son, and nothing more. I dropped the wine bottle. IT hit the kitchen floor and shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Ethan rushed in barefoot, concern flooding his face as I stood frozen, mouth open but empty of words. He kept asking if I was okay, brushing shards out of my path, holding my hands. I lied. I lied the way I always had to Ethan, and that night, when I saw Richard again across the deck, he looked at me like he knew it. He didn't approach. Not yet. But his eyes followed me like a tether I couldn't cut, watching, calculating, smiling with that same lazy confidence I once mistook for affection. God, how easy it was to fall into that old rhythm, my skin remembering his gaze before my mind could form thoughts. I hated him. I wanted him. The real breakdown started the next morning that I went out for air. Early. No makeup. No bra. Just one of Ethan's shirts hanging low off my shoulder, and a vague hope that I could outrun my own pulse. He was already there, sitting on the bench beneath the willow tree, legs spread like a king surveying what was his. He didn't say my name. He didn't need it. I sat beside him like I'd done it 1,000 times before. Silence stretched between us, taut and intimate, more dangerous than any words. And then he touched me. Not a grab, not a pull, just his fingers brushing mine. Barely there. Featherlight. But it might as well have been a knife. I jerked back as if burned, breath caught halfway to panic. What do you want? I managed, hating how thin my voice sounded. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at our hands, at the empty space between them. You were always terrible at pretending, he finally said, voice low, amused. Even with him. You don't know anything about me anymore. His smile was a slow cut. I know your tells. I know the way your pupils dilate when you're turned on, but don't want to be. I know that you sleep on the left side now because you don't want Ethan's arms to feel like mine. My cheeks burned, shame coiling under my skin like a living thing. Don't do this, I whispered. Do what? Remind you. And then he leaned in, not close enough to kiss, not quite. Just enough for his breath to warm my cheek, for his scent to punch a hole through the carefully built facade I called a life. You think marrying my son erased me from your body? I stood too fast. My knees wobbled. I almost felt. He didn't move to catch me. Good, because if he had, I might have let him. Ethan smiled at me over breakfast like nothing in the world was wrong. He asked about my sleep, offered me the last piece of toast, and brushed a stray hair behind my ear like I was something fragile and beloved. His eyes were warm, safe, full of a love that never questioned, never pushed. I wanted to scream, because while he smiled, Richard's shadow was still clinging to my skin like a bruise. I could feel it even as Ethan kissed my forehead, Richard's breath on my cheek, Richard's fingers tracing ghost paths down my wrist. I hadn't been touched, not really, but it was like my body remembered every moment we used to steal, and it made Ethan's gentleness unbearable that I watched him rinse his coffee mug, hum a stupid song under his breath, and I thought, you don't see it, do you? You don't see how I'm unraveling from the inside out. The truth was, Ethan was the kind of man you marry because you want peace. Richard was the kind of man you survive. With Ethan, everything was softness. Candlelight, picnics, whispered affection, and quiet nights on the couch. He believed in things like loyalty, like promises. And part of me ached to meet him in that same light. But the other part, the part one buried deeper every day, wanted blood and teeth and fire. Richard wasn't kind. He never pretended to be. But when he looked at me, it wasn't with pity or politeness. It was hunger. It was knowledge. It was the wild, unspoken truth that he could ruin me again, and I'd let him. I caught myself watching Ethan's hands, how carefully he peeled an orange, how precise and thoughtful he was. I wondered if he had any idea that those same hands had once held Richard's when he was a boy. That the man he called father used to press me against walls and whisper things that made me burn from the inside out. I should have left, gone for a drive, visited a friend, taken a shower, and scrubbed Richard out of my pores. Instead, I walked out to the garden, breathing too fast, too loud. I sat on the bench and tried to calm the storm in my chest. And when I looked up, he was there, Richard. Again, leaning against the tree like he belonged there. Like this wasn't my home now. Like I was still his. "You're playing house well," he said, voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "Go away. You don't want that." "Yes, I do." "Then why are you shaking?" I hadn't even noticed until he said it. My hands trembled in my lap like they had their own truth to confess. He stepped closer, each movement unhurried, deliberate, predatory. "You think he'll ever touch you the way I did?" he asked. I closed my eyes. "No," I whispered, and that was my mistake, because the moment the word left my lips, he was beside me. Not touching, God, not yet, but close enough that I could feel his heat seeping into my skin. He smelled like pine and danger, like every bad decision I'd ever loved too much. He didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. His voice alone peeled me open. "You're trying so hard to be good. But you were never good with me, Ava. You were fire. You were wild. You begged me to ruin you." "Don't," I breathed. "Why not?" His lips brushed the shell of my ear. "Tell me to leave, and I will. But mean it this time." I opened my mouth, and oh sound came out. Because even as Ethan smiled for me in the kitchen, somewhere inside, I was already falling back into Richard's arms, and this time, I didn't know if I wanted to climb back out. I stood in front of the mirror long after the sun dipped below the horizon, the house heavy in silence. My reflection stared back, same brown eyes, same curve of lips, same skin touched now by two men from the same bloodline. But I didn't recognize her anymore. She looked haunted, hollowed, like someone who'd been devoured from the inside and was trying to pretend the shape still held. I reached up and touched my face. I wanted to see if I was still real, still whole, still Ava. But all I could think of was the breath on my neck, the way Richard had stood behind me in the garden, not touching, but consuming all the same. I hadn't told Ethan. He came again. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid he'd be angry, but because I was afraid he wouldn't be. Ethan would forgive me. That was the worst part. He would look at me with those warm, soft eyes and ask what was wrong and hold me like I hadn't just betrayed him with my silence, with my trembling, with my indecision. He'd never scream. He'd never demand answers. He'd only wait, and I couldn't bear the weight of being loved so gently when my body still ached with memory. I leaned closer to the glass and whispered, "What are you doing?" The woman in the mirror didn't answer. I wasn't afraid of Richard. Not in the way people mean when they say fear. I wasn't scared he'd hurt me. Not physically. That was never his cruelty. Richard's violence was slower, sweeter, buried in the way he could pull parts of me out I'd tried to bury long ago. He made me want to be ruined. That was the danger. I used to think I was strong. That walking away from him meant I had won. But now I see I never really left. I carried him inside me, like a secret itch I couldn't scratch. I let Ethan build a new world around me, painted in pastels and quiet grace, but I never truly stepped into it. Somewhere deep down, I was still waiting for the knock, still waiting to be claimed again. And now that it had come, I was cracking. My skin still burned from his nearness, though he never touched me. Just his presence was enough to light the fuse beneath my ribs. I wanted to scream at him, hit him, kiss him, push him against the wall, and surrender to the chaos I swore I buried. But what horrified me more than the wanting was that I didn't even feel guilt the way I should. I felt guilt like a perfume, something I sprayed over myself before bed. Something that lingered faintly on my clothes, but never truly soaked in. It didn't stop me from imagining. It didn't stop the hunger that twisted low in my stomach when I heard his voice in my head. I remembered the way he used to say my name like it was a threat and a prayer all at once. The way he'd pull me to him, not asking, not begging, just taking, and I'd let him again and again because it felt like truth. Even if it destroyed me, it felt real. With Ethan, I felt safe. With Richard, I felt alive. I closed my eyes and whispered, "You don't want him." But my body didn't believe me that I was split right down the middle. One side aching for the comfort of safety, the other burning for the danger of surrender. I didn't know which half was truly me anymore. Maybe neither. Maybe both. Or maybe I was just a woman too broken to choose anything that didn't hurt, and why breath fogged the glass. I stared at it until the shape of my face blurred. The mirror couldn't show what was inside, and I was grateful. If it could, I might shatter from the shame alone, because the truth was simple and cruel that I didn't know how to be good anymore, and worse, I didn't think I wanted to. The storm had been threatening all day, heavy clouds pressing low against the lake, wind curling through the trees like fingers in my hair. The kind of weather that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. Ethan had gone to visit his mother. He kissed my cheek, told me he'd be back by midnight. I watched him drive away, feeling something inside me unravel, thread by thread, with every mile he put between us. And then came the knock that I didn't ask how he knew Ethan was gone. I didn't ask what he wanted. I knew. Richard didn't speak when I opened the door. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. Dark, burning, unforgiving. He stepped inside like he belonged there, like this had always been inevitable, that I told myself I should stop him, that I should say no, tell him to leave, remind him, and myself, of what we'd built in the ruins he left behind. But I didn't. I stepped aside. He walked past me like a storm moving through a quiet town, taking the air with him. I could barely breathe. My body was already responding to his presence, remembering the way his gaze could make me forget who I was supposed to be. I closed the door behind us, locked it, not because I was afraid someone would come in, but because I didn't want a way out. He turned to face me in the dim light of the kitchen, his chest rising and falling, controlled but tense, like something inside him was straining against a chain. I stood still, my heart pounding, every nerve ending wide open. He reached for me slowly, almost reverently, brushing a strand of hair from my face with the back of his fingers. That one touch, so soft, so familiar, shattered me. "Ava," he whispered, and it wasn't a question or a plea. It was a promise, a warning, a surrender. And I surged toward him like I'd been starving, like I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life and only now realized it. His mouth met mine, fierce and consuming, and the world fell away that I didn't think about Ethan. I didn't think about vows or consequences or morning light. All I knew was the heat of Richard's hands on my skin, the way he held me like I was a secret he was never willing to lose again. We moved through the house in silence, our bodies speaking the words we'd buried for years. Every touch was a memory reborn. Every breath was a confession. There was no gentleness, no patience, just hunger, just need. He stripped me bare in the hallway like a man unwrapping something he'd already claimed long ago. I clawed at him, desperate to feel the weight of his body, the certainty of him. When he finally pressed me down, I didn't flinch. I didn't fight. Did I open myself like a wound? And he filled it. The thunder cracked overhead, matching the rhythm we lost ourselves in. It was messy, furious, honest. For the first time in years, I felt real. I felt alive. Afterward, I lay beneath him, breathless and dazed, his hand on my hip, his mouth pressed to the hollow of my throat. I could taste regret forming already, thick and bitter on my tongue, but I didn't speak it. He looked at me, something raw and ruined in his eyes, and said, "This was always going to happen, Ava." And I believed him because I had never stopped wanting him. I had only learned how to lie better. But tonight, there were no lies left. No rules. No escape. Only us. And a silence so heavy, it felt like the world might never recover from it. The morning light was too clean. It poured through the windows with no mercy, revealing the shape of us, clothes scattered, the imprint of his body still warm in my bed, and the red line he'd traced down my thigh with his mouth still tingling like a bruise kissed into skin. But he was gone. Not a note. Not a whisper. Just absence. I sat up slowly, the sheets clinging to my skin, my chest aching with something far more complicated than guilt. Desire had always been easy. Fire doesn't think, it devours. But when the smoke clears, you see what you've burned down. And I'd burned everything. The silence of the house mocked me. Ethan would be home in hours, with his easy smile, his trust, his soft hands that never demanded, only offered. I'd married his kindness to save myself from the man who'd made me feel too much. But last night, I remembered what it was like to be completely undone. To be known in a way that wasn't gentle, but raw. Real. Did I walk to the mirror, still naked, hoping maybe it would show me something I couldn't feel. But it didn't show the ache between my legs or the tremble in my ribs. It didn't show the shame blooming like a bruise behind my breastbone. It only showed me my eyes. Too bright. Too hollow. I pressed my hand to the glass like I was trying to reach the woman I used to be. The one who believed that running could fix anything. Now I stood in the ruins of both men. One who loved me too softly, and one who never loved me at all. But Richard had taken something last night. Not just my body. He'd stolen the last excuse I had for pretending. I had to choose now, confess, to destroy, or to live a lie deeper than the one I ran from. And the cruelest part of all was that even now, with everything on fire inside me, I still wanted him to come back. Just one more knock. As I could either close the door or open it wide and burn again.